Hey, Dave, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Sure, Brian. Great to be here. So, I've been in sales my entire career. Actually, went to school for engineering and didn't go that route. So the first half of my career, I carried a bag, went through the day-to-day stuff. And then last 20 years, I've been in sales leadership. Grew up in New York. I started out selling on Wall Street, which is a tough place, financial services. And then a lead came in for the U.S. Army. So, and they had no one else in the office to do it. So I handled it, closed the deal. It was a very large deal for the Army. And I got labeled a federal guy. I got sucked down to the DC area, and I've been doing Fed stuff ever since.
Yeah. How do you like it? You must. It's been doing it for a while.
Yeah, it's another dynamic. It's, first of all, the deals are bigger, which I like, the bigger deals. And then, there's another element, in terms of expertise, understanding how the federal government operates. That side's good. I don't always love the bureaucracy and how, when stuff when we go in continuing resolution, that's not always fun. But overall, I do like it. And I really like the big deal play.
Yeah. Cool. And what makes you a great sales guy?
Uh, I think it's being a good sales guy. First of all, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different elements to it, right? I think the biggest thing is, really listening well, showing empathy, putting yourself in, your customer's shoes, and really focusing on their problem and their challenge. And it could be it's the business challenge, but also there's a personal win. I think that's what makes a good sales guy. This is just a lot of focus around the customer and help solve problems. Obviously, there's a lot of other elements. I mean, I found a lot of athletes are really good salespeople that like to compete.
Yeah.
They play hard and they know how to win and lose. I think those are all key elements.
And what was the impetus to go into leadership?
I always gravitated to the strategic side of things, and I think that's really, frankly, one of the most least played or least valued elements in being a sales leader is really trying to create an effective strategy. So I kind of always gravitated to that, Brian, and also always liked the idea of I really think that sales is a team sport. I really love the whole collaboration. I enjoyed it when I sold, and I really enjoy leading that aspect of it. So I think those are the key reasons.
Okay. And when you say strategy, what does that mean to you?
Strategy is, and it's particularly, I think, meaningful for being in a vertical like federal. So strategy is really trying to identify, what business problem you're solving. If you saw my background, I worked for companies that sold a capability that could solve a lot of different problems. Now that's a good thing because you have a lot of stuff to sell, and it's also an evil because unless you focus, you're nowhere.
Yeah.
And that's why when I mentioned earlier, it's one of the least valued things in a sales leader is where is your best chance to win, and what is a business problem you're going to kind of rally around, and who's the customer that you're going to focus on, and that is it's really important to not only to impart that on the team, but then to get your marketing team rallying around that, partners rallying around that. Because all too often what you find is that you have sales guys selling stuff, marketing is messaging something else, sales development is calling about some other thing, and you have partners. And if you have good sales leadership and you could pull all that together and identify the opportunities that give you best chance to win, I think that's really important. And that's I think that's really an edge that sales leaders should focus on versus micromanaging and taking good salespeople and trying to tell them what they should be doing.
I think it is too, because that's, I kind of call it judgment. Some people call it critical thinking. It may be called strategy, but we only have a certain amount of time.
Absolutely. And it's, at the end of the day, it's a numbers game is what is your highest win probability? What is the deal that you're going to win most? And select that, and what is the kind of customer, and So especially with enterprise sales, where there's such a lengthy sales process, and quite frankly, there's an investment the company makes in pursuing a sales opportunity, you got to pick the right one. And I think that's a lot of that is on leadership to provide that leadership and define what that is, particularly in a vertical, but I also think it does apply to a horizontal customer base as well.
Yeah, because I'm very familiar with the companies that you've worked at. And I can see certainly with one of them that it would fit really well, because if you go in and you talk about it in general, they have the same feeling, the Rorschach kind of experiment where you put up the diagram, the psychiatrist puts it up and wonders what you see as a way of then determining what to work on.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't give so the federal government is a very risk averse. So when they're looking at you and saying, "Am I going to buy from you?" and you're saying, "Well, this is kind of the first time we're going to be doing this. We think we got a great product, but you may be your first." Your chances are winning are low. So I always like to think that customers like to buy from organizations that are both relevant and credible.
Yeah.
They have relevance. They understand the problem. They've done it before. They speak the language, and they're credible, which means they have references, and they actually have customers say, "Hey, these guys have done it before. You're not the first." So being relevant and credible is really important. And if you focus on those opportunities, you're much better off.
And how did you come about the particular priority or focus for your current company, and how did you make sure you picked the right one? Or
yeah, it was an interesting exercise, and I think strategy and culture are more intertwined than people think. So listen, make it a nice place to work, be a reasonable person, care about your people. Some of that is basic. So a lot of that just came down to, so when I first came on board, and I guess the last two companies that I've been, the business was struggling, and things have really took off when we created a strategy. So how did we do it? We looked at a lot of different elements. We just frankly looked at where have we won deals? And I said, 3 is the right number of things to focus on, ideally. So let's look at all the stuff that we sold and look at what are the top 3 areas that we actually have had wins to attribute to. Looking at pipeline, where is our existing pipeline? And we also looked at, where's the competitive landscape? If one of our competitors owns a space, probably not a good idea to focus on that space. But the federal market's such a target-rich market. There's so many different places to pick. You just avoid that one. And so the way I did it was I actually got together with the team, and I made them part of the process. Because I was, I'm the new guy in the company. You have people who've been selling here a long time. Why not listen to them? And it makes it a lot easier when they're part of the solution, defining it, versus telling them, here's where we're going to focus. I'm the new guy, and I'm a smart guy, and focus on these 3 areas. That's not necessarily a great recipe. So we got together for a couple of days. We had a lot of good discussions back and forth. Where should we focus? It was a very respectful discussion, and we exited with the team saying, "You know what? We're in. We're into that," and then we're off and running.
And was it accurate, or did it end up being pivoted later on during the year? Or
yeah, that's a good,
tend to
I know they're
their
shiny
minds.
objects, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you, Brian, and so we came up with something called a 3x3, and we focused on a few areas. One was acquisition, one was logistics, and one was manpower. Those are 3 areas. And I've been here for 5.5 years, and those still are our 3 areas. So I think some of that's dumb luck but we didn't. It was really important is we didn't keep pivoting, and pivoting marketing and pivoting partners, and here's our focus today. Now, obviously, we did deals outside these 3 areas. We don't turn away business on an opportunistic basis, but who we're really known for, those are the 3 areas that still exist. So I'm pretty proud of the fact that we didn't do all these pivots. Could be pretty frustrating being a salesperson when that happens.
Yeah. Now, I can see that as a great target, but then you got to take those targets and prioritize those. And then you got to kind of adapt your process to each of them, maybe segment the pre-sales people who are really good at one particular problem domain. I'm asking.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think you find that, salespeople tend to gravitate to stuff they're
Towards
good at,
money.
right? Yeah, hopefully the good ones do. Some of the ones that aren't doing that, you begin to question whether if they have the right motive. But yeah, I mean, it's not completely clean, So some of the solutions don't actually fit into this like nice little buckets. They might
Yeah.
be, but and it was a 3 by 3 because for each of the domains that I established, there were 3 applications under each domain. So under acquisition, there were 3 subsections that we focused on. And you brought up a good point for like sales development. A lot of times sales development tend to be more inexperienced and partners don't always understand the product. If you could kind of, rally around this, because this is the specific area we're focusing on, and you enable them and they understand that area, they can be a lot more effective if it's just focus on these few areas.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, Brian, one of the things that I think is really interesting is focus more on the problem, enabling folks on understanding the problem than your product.
Yeah.
And focus on that side. No, I said it's more important to understand like what they call things and their language and build the confidence, because in many cases I find organizations will buy from the customers, from the organizations that understand their problem the best versus who's got the best mousetrap.
Well, that's it. Because if you really study listening, the other person doesn't just want to be heard, they want to be understood.
Exactly.
And
And
that's what working about the problem does. The person who understands them the best.
yes, and understanding is not so much like what's the business challenge, but understanding that, hey, there's a lot of risk here. I'm pretty
Yeah.
scared. I want a low risk solution, or this is really important for my career, or this is our people. We want to keep our people. We don't want to get rid of. All of those are elements that quite often, when you look at normal discovery, it's all focused around the business problem versus what the real win is, and there's a
Yeah.
big difference.
And did you segment the sales team based off of these particular markets, or were they still kind of agency based?
Yeah, they're still there's one sales model where there's a notion of an overlay where you have folks that have expertise in one area, and I'm not a huge fan of overlays because it's usually like one person's doing the work, and it's relationships are really important. So
Yeah.
having someone with subject matter expertise driving the sale, but doesn't really that
Know the
isn't
people.
necessarily in tune with the customer. So no, so I kept it by getting deeper, and when I added people, we actually just got deeper in the account, not necessarily by expertise, but by the relationship, and it was very account based versus solution based.
Yeah. And what other part of sales leadership are you really passionate about?
So I think that the 2 things I think are quite often overlooked is one is strategy, the other one is culture. So I think if sales leaders spent more on strategy and culture and less on micromanaging, this would be a better place for
You think?
a lot of people. I mean, I honestly think that good salespeople, you hire good salespeople, they know how to sell, and so let's talk about the other area, which is culture. And I really do think that sales culture is an absolute competitive advantage. A couple areas why it's important. It's really hard, like for me, recruiting in the DC area, federal people is hard. It's hard to get them come on board, and a lot of times, most folks, like we talked about, are coin operated. They want to go to a place where they can make a lot of money. Hopefully, they feel that way. But there is a notion of really working for a great team where there's a lot of talent, people get along well. If you go to SKO, you could have a beer, you could sit around with someone else, and you can actually enjoy their company. And I think a lot of that is on the leader. And if you establish a really good culture, a culture that really focuses on collaboration, that focuses on team play. One of the interesting areas around building a culture is what I found is that if you could establish a really good strategy and you have a really good vision of where we're going to sell into, that is one of the best things you could do to build a culture and to build a lot of team rallying around that. Is like, okay, we really understand it. Here's what we're focused on, and it makes sense. So I think there's a lot of areas. I mean, there's so many different ways I found that folks who do it well, they focus on less like video calls, more face-to-face meetings.
Yeah.
COVID's been over for a long time now. There's no reason to do. We're all in the DC area. There's no reason to do a video call, and also, I think recruiting carefully. So recruiting carefully, make sure you don't, even if you find a candidate that may be tremendous, but if you've got some toxic behavior, may not be the best hire. So building a sales culture, I think, helps recruit, and it also equally important, and probably more important, is retaining top talent. If folks feel part of a team, they feel really good, they have friendships. All these are really important, Brian.
And how do you characterize that to potential candidate? Because they're looking for a good opportunity. Not many sales leaders talk about culture. They
Right.
talk about the company's hot, the product's hot, the territory's great, comp plan's delicious, all of that. But nor do you find many sales leaders who know what culture means other than pizza on Friday.
Right. I think that a lot about, I still think that people who have been in this industry, many of us have worked for organizations where it's brutal.
Yeah.
It's toxic. There are just, the leadership may not necessarily value, a lot of the things that salespeople really thrive on, which is salespeople tend to be, very extroverted. They like to be part of a team. I still really believe, Brian, that the territory is important. How many people are hitting their quota? All those important things. The comp plan is important. I can't say that culture is going to trump that, but all that being equal, I do think that culture does play a big role. And when I go to a company, if I meet with a bunch of people and say, you know what, I'm kind of like these people and I like who they are, versus going, to an organization where the culture is just very, very different.
Yeah.
Like I don't typically, even if there's a great comp plan, and a lot of times I won't subscribe to that or take accept that role. So I think that culture plays much more of a role than we think. It's not just about.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you surf LinkedIn enough and you look at enough profiles, a lot of people, 5 jobs in 5 years, and you're like, something's, if it was one person and you understand it, but if it's like 30%, there's something going on.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's interesting because when I interview a lot of people. You have that where they say, I said, why did you leave? You've been in all these different companies, and what was the reason? What was kind of rationale? And hey, this looked like a great opportunity, and eventually you'll find with a lot of candidates have done this a few times. They say, you know what, I'm really looking for a company that I could really thrive in, that I could really I've been through enough of that. Eventually, they value culture.
Yeah.
And it does not come. So here's, like we talked about, I listened to a lot of your, you have excellent content on the web, and it's a lot about, well, too much micromanagement, too much of the dashboards, not enough being in front of customers, too much being in front of dashboards. And building culture takes work. Like it just doesn't, it's not all about like just buying, happening. It's hard. Like, so I just had, for example, a week and a half ago, I had a sales rally in the office. Took a lot of work to put together, but it was really cool. And it was the first time I did something like that. Folks thought it was great. We had a great quarter. And, it took a lot of work to put that meeting together, but it was really important to do that. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of effort that goes into building a sales culture, as well as, ruthless recruiting and really making sure that your top performers, you get to know them so well. You take it, all of these things happen. And if you're spending all your time in front of dashboards and looking at CRM and trying to tell great salespeople what they should be doing, and you're not planning sales rallies and you're not doing a lot of these other things, I think you're missing the boat, because culture and strategy is I feel way more important than focus on micromanaging salespeople.
And is this something that was new to the company, or when did this kind of come into your mindset? Was it at the current company or?
Yeah, I mean, are you talking specifically about the importance of culture?
Yeah, you kind of like, I've interviewed probably 200 sales leaders, never come up once.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and it's, I think, and I see it, a lot of, again, I try to, and I'll answer your question, but I try to focus on how can I help salespeople? How can I make their lives less stressful versus more stressful? But focusing on like building this collaboration. I think it did take time. I personally, if I look back at my career, when I was an individual contributor, I really was very sensitive to harsh cultures.
Yeah.
And for some reason, Brian, I don't know, in the enterprise software space, there seems to be a prevalence of just like ruthless environments. And it never made sense to me.
I think the mindset was always, you're getting paid so well, we can treat you so bad. Right? It was that kind of, you're not going anywhere. You're making more than the CEO. So where are you going? So we don't have to be nice to you anymore.
Yeah, and there's a notion that also in some leadership is that like good salespeople, when they forget how to sell. And I really don't. I really believe that really effective salespeople, if they have a bad quarter or whatever, they lose a deal. That does happen, but to continue to support them versus putting undue pressure that if you don't close that deal, we're putting you on plan. I mean, is that a kind of culture that anyone wants to work in?
Yeah. Yeah. You don't do that to an athlete, right? You don't do that to a performer of any kind. It's like, it negates the point.
It defies logic. And for some reason, and I think for some reason, it seems to be more prevalent in enterprise software than elsewhere, but it seems to be, very common. And, when I speak to candidates, and I speak very genuinely about, it's a really important thing to really want to come to work and really feel good about things. It seems in a way foreign to them. Like, wow, this is something I haven't heard before. Like your reaction. Yeah, but you spoke to all the sales leaders on your show, and no one has talked about how important culture is for producing results.
Yeah, and especially in federal, because you got that culture, and then there are always commercial companies in 99% of the cases that don't understand the government.
Right.
So they don't understand the timelines, the purchasing, the color of money, the calendar year, the motivations. They love the revenue, but they don't like the upfront GSA and FARs and DFARs. And
wow, it's pretty impressive. That's so you obviously have a good understanding. Yeah, and it's they don't understand and that impacts your ability to, when you're in front of a customer, to have the complete solution. But I think when we're talking about sales leadership, it's not a very comfortable place to work, because if you are, say, go out and sell to the civilian patch, there's a time, if you understand the business, it takes time to build a territory, and you need to offer a draw, and you need to provide a quota relief, and you need to do all these different things in order to make it make sense for the candidate. And if you could give the confidence that we understand it does take time. And by the way, deals sometimes vanish because money gets pulled to support
Right.
some
There's
other initiative in
war.
the
Yeah.
government. It's That's part of the culture. It's like, okay, these guys get it. And I feel really good about, the organization I'm in is DC based. We got started out in the DoD market, and the leadership down from the founders down really understand it. And that makes a difference. So it's not just me, it's of folks above me that
Yeah.
understand the sales cycle and what it takes and the right quotas and how to market and all these different elements that a candidate wants to hear. That's kind of where I want to go. I want to go to a company that really gets it.
Yeah. And how long did it take you to develop this mindset as a sales leader? Was it recent, or is it really from the beginning
I
when you
wish I
were a
could.
rep? And
Yeah, I wish I could say it was quick, but it did take time. And I have to say that it was one of the most I underestimated the jump from going to an individual contributor to a sales leader. I thought it would be easier, and it took a lot longer. It took a long time. It's and it's also an interesting thing is as a sales leader, promoting your best shortstop to become the manager of the team, different skill set, right?
very
And
different.
I've so it it did take time. It definitely, and I don't know how to quantify it, but it took longer than I thought. It took years to
Yeah.
really understand all these things versus, hey, let's just focus on how we're going to close this deal, and ultra focus just around the deal without really looking at some of the other things we were talking about today, like about culture and strategy. When I start to realize that, I spend most of my time right now, if I look at my day, on building strategy and culture, and make this the best place to work on the Beltway.
Yeah. And one last question. Let's say somebody's been a rep 10 years and they're wondering whether they should become a leader. It isn't innate, but they're not sure. What would you tell them?
A lot of times I'd say that, you like making you make the W-2s that you're making. In many cases, you're not going to be able to replicate that as a leader. So I find that, honestly, most good salespeople are probably going to be much happier staying in sales.
Yeah.
I really do think. I think there are some salespeople that have aspirations where leadership and this whole strategic thing that we're talking about, they get a charge out of it. But I think, and this also defies, logic, which is most good salespeople probably is not the right move to become a sales leader. And I think it's really an individual, a very specific salesperson that has both skill sets that in many times can make the best sales leaders.
Yeah. And have you looked or noticed a particular thing when you're talking to them where you sway them towards the leadership?
A lot of times it's really good sales professionals, are very deal oriented and they don't necessarily, again, and they like, and their idea of being a sales manager is, well, I could just take advantage or take control of the sale, which is the last thing you want to do.
You want to do.
Okay. So there's some that, like, when they start talking about collaboration and building a team, some people are just like really charismatic. They're great, and folks want to work for them. And a lot of those folks are really great because they could build a team. People want to work for them. People gravitate to them. I love that characteristic, and I have some of those folks on my team right now.
Cool. Hey, Dave, I really appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
Probably the best thing is LinkedIn. Just come to me. I love to connect with others and share stories. But I appreciate the time, Brian. It was great chatting with you.